welcome to Cape Cod Book Scene, a half-hour show about the literary life of Cape Cod. I'm your host, Melanie Lowers, books editor at the Cape Cod Times and creator of the Cape Cod Book Scene column and the TV show. My guest this morning is Sara Hoagland Hunter, who is a fairly prolific author here on the Cape, a part-time Cape resident, but very tied to the Cape through long life experience. And her books show that. Good morning, Sara. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Melanie. What a treat. I'm so happy to be here.
Where do we start in talking about your writing?
Well, let's start with Cape Cod, since we're at the Cape Cod book scene, and I do have ties to the Cape, and I've always found, as I know you have from reading you for a long time, that the Cape inspires literary inspiration, and that's a theme that you've explored and inspired me to explore a little bit. Why is that? And
why is that?
For me, part of it is childhood. Growing up, packing the car on the last day of school in a suburb of Boston, jumping into the family station wagon, and being in one magical place for the whole summer.
Wow.
And you know, does that happen anymore? I try to plant myself in one place in Centerville for the summer, but duty sometimes calls me over the bridge. But it's my favorite spot to be and write. In, you know, summer season, winter, off season, I love, so.
And all right, so let's talk about how that's informed your books. You have 3 books?
I've actually, yes, well, I've brought my 3 favorites with me today. Okay. 2 out of 3 are Cape Cod themed. Not surprising, because we write about what we love.
Right.
And so I've actually written 10 books for children. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, these, I brought my faves, but I knew I wanted to be a children's book writer when I was a little girl, and I think I must have read every book in the children's section of the Osterville Library. And so I love doing book talks at all the libraries on the Cape, because I have such a feeling for that. And
now, did you study to be a children's book author?
I didn't really study to be a children's book writer, but I think with all writing, you know, life informs your writing, and what you love informs your writing. And I actually was a French and Italian major at Dartmouth, because I love to travel and I love to gab with people, as you can tell.
Yeah.
But and the children's book writing kicked in after I graduated. I first worked as a journalist for the Christian Science Monitor, and then when we adopted our 2 kids, I had been teaching English, high school English, and I began to shift over into some elementary school teaching in some gifted and talented programs, and then writing, which I love. So the 2 books that are about the Cape, the Lighthouse Santa, which I can just point, I can see, we can see it, okay. And my new book, Every Turtle Counts, are the Cape Cod themed ones. And the Lighthouse Santa is based on the plane flights of Edward Rowe Snow, whom a lot of your audience will know because they love books, and he's someone that a lot of people have in their library as a nautical historian. He loved writing about the Cape and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and the Boston Harbor Islands, and there's a monument to him on one of the Boston Harbor Islands. Yeah. And he is someone I admire because I emulate his storytelling, writing, and sharing great New England history with the public, and I love to do that too. And I thought it would be fun to share his story in this book for kids. One of the things that he did was to drop Christmas presents every year from a twin-engine Cessna that took off out of Norwood, if you can imagine, and he dropped presents to the 300 or so lighthouses from Maine all the way down to Long Island. And
wow.
He's someone that I met, and I knew his daughter, went to school with her, and I was so jealous that she got to go on these plane flights that I just thought, well, if I can't go with them, I'm going to write about it someday. So that's been a fun one. And then the new book, based on a Cape Cod adventure, is this one in the middle, Every Turtle Counts. And I became fascinated when I met Bob Prescott at Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary when, in a brief chapter, as I was working as a documentary producer, once again, storytelling, great stories on the Cape, and I did a documentary about these sea turtle rescues, this rare phenomenon that you may know about, where the rarest breed of sea turtle on Earth, the Kemp's Ridleys, come up. They're born on one beach down in Mexico, and sometimes the 2- and 3-year-olds make their way all the way up to Billingsgate Shoal in Wellfleet to feed on shellfish. And they, for whatever reason, the GPS of these little guys does not help them when the water gets cold and it's time to go north around Provincetown to go south back to Florida and the Gulf, and they got stuck. And
is that the cold stunning?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So they become cold stunned in the water, and between Thanksgiving and Christmas, Bob Prescott and the Wellfleet Bay Audubon folks and New England Aquarium and an army of Cape volunteers of all ages are out on the beaches on the north side of the Cape, from Sandwich all the way up to Truro and Provincetown, looking for these turtles. The Kemp's Ridleys are only about the size of a small pizza, and they float in on the waves. They're gray, so they're hard to spot. And everyone goes out, and then we're asked to just put up a stick or an old buoy or something, and then and then to call Mass Audubon so that they can pick up the turtles, thaw them very gradually out of this comatose, cold-stunned state, and then New England Aquarium plus National Marine Life Center in Buzzards Bay, and various aquariums along the East Coast help in the rehabilitation and later release of the turtles. So anyway, long answer, but that's what I wanted to write about. And then, of course, as a fiction writer, I get to impose a character on that set of facts and who's going to rescue the turtle. And so that's another story.
And that's a child.
Yes.
So this is really, this book also is going to appeal to young children who can learn that they have a place in protecting nature too.
Exactly, exactly.
I know you've been going around and reading the book and everything. What has the response been?
It's been really wonderful, and partly because the story is written on 2 levels, if not more. I mean, I'm sure the reader always brings their own perspective to it, so maybe an infinite number of levels, but the way I wrote it was that the main character is based on my niece, Mimi, and she wanted me to use her real name in the book, which I do, and it's based on Mimi as a 7-year-old, and Mimi is now 24. She's a graduate of the Riverview School in Sandwich.
How
so so she's on the autism spectrum, for those of your audience who aren't familiar with the wonderful Riverview School. And so the story is not about autism. In fact, it's not mentioned till one word on the last page, but it's about Mimi being the hero who recognizes that the turtle is not dead and that she needs to stick with it, much as her mother is sticking with her. So so it's a hopeful story about someone who's sensitive towards animals and kind of comes out of her shell as the turtle is being rescued. I was really grateful that Temple Grandin endorsed the book as a nature book, not a story about autism. So anyway, so the response has been wonderful, because I do a lot of homework, just like you do on your articles and your show, and so it's nice to be able to share it with all ages, grandparents and children and friends in between.
So you've got, and let's talk about your this third one, the fave that you brought with you too, because it's very timely.
Yes, thanks for asking. You're such a good interviewer.
Well, they're sitting right here, and I'm curious about that one too.
Hint, right? Yeah, hint. So the Unbreakable Code was the first book that I wrote for children not on assignment. I had done a few books for Jim Henson Productions, a book called Miss Piggy's Night Out about Miss Piggy and Kermit. I had done some things for Warner Brothers because I was script writing for the Looney Tunes franchise. But this one is the one that I always wanted to write, because when I was at Dartmouth College, I had a friend who was Native American, and she said to me, your goal is to write children's books. You need to write about the unbreakable code, the code of the Navajo code talkers that was never broken during World War II. And it took me a while to have time to do that, but when I did, wow, was it worth the effort. And so I had the really good fortune and supreme privilege of going to the Navajo reservation and interviewing.
Isn't it a beautiful place?
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I mean, and the illustrator of, it's the same illustrator of Lighthouse Santa and the Unbreakable Code, was living in Paradise Valley, Arizona, and really spent a lot of time on the Navajo reservation up in the the Four Corners area of Arizona and New Mexico. And she got the spirituality and the tingle of Canyon de Chelly and Chinle and Window Rock and Gallup. I mean, you must have been there.
I've been there, and that's, I know exactly what she was seeing and how it makes you feel.
Oh, it's just amazing. And the people, these World War II veterans, Marines, who were so modest and in the Navajo tradition, barely want to even have eye contact, you know, afforded us the privilege, my illustrator to illustrate and me to tell the story, because they're so modest. They didn't want to brag and tell their own story of their Marine service. And I got to interview 16 of the code talkers, many of whom are gone now. And well, the original, the last, and why you're so smart to pick up on the timeliness of it. So there were 29 original inventors of the code, although later 420 Navajos were trained in the code, so that the ones who spread the code on Iwo Jima when the flag was raised, they delivered the message in code to the ships. Those were not the original 29 inventors of the code. But the last original inventor, Chester Nez, passed away this week in his mid-90s.
I think he was 93.
Okay. And just as the rest, modest as and, you know, touching, tender, patriotic.
I heard a brief interview with him as part of the tribute to him. And one of the things he said, and this was 2 years ago, so he was in his early 90s then, was how proud he was to have served his country. And, you know, we only think about the differences, but we don't think about the similarities that we all have. And here was someone who was seeing country before politics or, you know, past you know, problems or things like that, who was seeing country first, which I thought was pretty amazing. It was
so moving, and that was the most important thing I learned. In fact, am I allowed to read the last page of the book? Because it's you know, segues from what you're saying. So basically, for many of us, the fact that all of the Navajo code talkers were sent to government boarding schools when they were 5 years old. They were not allowed to stay home. They were all forced to speak English, not allowed to speak Navajo, and this is how the book starts out, with a grandfather reminiscing about that childhood and how if he spoke English, he had to eat lye soap.
Oh, if he spoke Navajo, you mean?
I mean, I'm sorry. Yes, if he spoke Navajo, he had to have soap in his mouth. And so a lot of times the elementary school kids, when I'm speaking to them, will say, well, why would they ever go fight for a country, you know, that made them do that and cut off their ceremonial ponytails and so on? Well, so I weave that from quotes that I got from the actual men into the last page. So the grandson asked the grandfather, why did you leave the reservation in the first place? His grandfather lifted him gently onto the horse. The answer to that is in the code, he said. The code name for America was Our Mother. And this was their land when Pearl Harbor was attacked and America was attacked.
Right.
And the Navajos are so tied to the land that, you know, they enlisted in a secret project. They were yanked off the reservation, these 29 early guys, to Camp Pendleton. They'd never been off the reservation before. They were young men, except for one of my buddies, the late Carl Gorman, who lied about his age. He was 32, but he really wanted to fight.
Oh.
And then the youngest lied about his age,
right.
Dean Wilson, who was 16. But there were no birth records on the reservation.
Right.
So anyway, but they were hauled off on this secret bus trip to Camp Pendleton, not knowing what they were going to be doing in San Diego, and coming up with the code. And they were devoted and committed. As soon as they heard the radio broadcast that they were needed, they enlisted.
Wow.
Anyway.
So let's backtrack a little bit about process.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, you're a writer, a professional writer, and some of you might recognize Sara's name also from Cape Cod Life and other publications. So that's your basic, you know, approach to everything as a writer.
Yes.
What does it take then to translate your interests into something for children?
Really thoughtful question coming from another writer. The process, whether I'm writing for Cape Cod Life magazine or I've done several really fun stories for Prime Time, which is part of your newspaper.
The Cape Cod Times, and The View. Did you write for The View
I
magazine?
haven't written for The View. I'd love to write for The View. Little plug.
No,
but,
I wish you could.
yeah.
We don't have The View.
Oh,
anymore.
whoops. Oh,
but
gosh.
Prime Time,
Okay.
definitely.
Yes. So,
Definitely.
yeah, and I've enjoyed that. So the process is the same in terms of how I start out. I hear of a really interesting idea, and the problem is every day I hear of incredible ideas. So it's just, that's never the problem. It's having the time to follow through and write about those ideas. And I store them away. Used to be an idea box, you know, now it's on my computer. And then comes the research phase, and I love that, and I take it very seriously, just as seriously when I'm writing for children as when I'm writing for a magazine. And I really devote a lot of time. I mean, each of the 3 books that are sitting here have, you know, several years worth of research in them.
Long
yes, because I would like to spend time with the people who, you know, are really, who lived it, because I really write realistic historical fiction is my favorite. So, for instance, with Lighthouse Santa, I spent a lot of time on Nantucket interviewing women in their 80s who grew up in the lighthouse, because I set it at Great Point on Nantucket.
Right.
Or for the turtle book, I felt like I needed to be on a sea turtle rescue and get to know the people who were doing that. And certainly my whole life of getting to know my niece and the autism community informed that. And then with the Code Talkers, you know, several trips out to the reservation and spending time in a classroom of Navajo students, of 3rd graders, to know what they knew and were interested in. So that's the same, whoever I'm writing for. And then I guess the trickiest part would be the actual drafting. And
are these all 32-page?
Yes.
Okay, because that's an important point to think about. Most picture books are 32-page books.
Right.
That's pretty standard for picture books. Then you go into a different level of writing.
Right.
From perhaps either an older child or a book that's, you know, going to be a parent and child book, that kind of thing. But the picture books are 32 standard. So you've got a template
It's
in
like
some respects,
writing
don't you?
poetry. And when I'm reading aloud to the children, for instance, I read to 80 third graders in Sandwich at the Wing School last week, I say to them, you know, I really want you to listen to every word because I only, you know, had a few words. You really need to stick to about 1,000 words. It's like writing poetry, and I'm putting a lot of information into a small template.
Right.
And I also ask them, which the teachers love, how many drafts do you think I did of the Unbreakable Code, for example?
Right.
And, you know, they all raise their hands. 2 or 3, and I'm like, well, does your teacher ever make you rewrite? And they all groan, and I say, well, the next time she does, just remember that this took me 27 drafts. And the teachers are all like, thank you. So
that is the bane of young writers, is redoing anything that's on the page. I despised it and when I was a kid, and yet it's the absolute crux. If you're going to be a halfway decent writer, it's the absolute crux of getting there, and enjoying the process. That only comes, I think, with adulthood, unless you're a born writer.
Oh no, I hated it too. And in some ways, I always try to recapture the child in me that way, because now I'm just perfect, and that's a wonderful quality to just let it all go and write. So, but yeah, the rewriting, the editing's very important. So
well, and also I would assume that you're very aware of word choice. That some words are going to be the right ones for working at this level, and other words are just going to be one shade away from where you need it to be. So that must be complicated.
And that is, I mean, it's like writing poetry, because it is poetry. When a picture book is accepted by a publisher, it has been read out loud by the editors and the assistant editors. All of the big houses that I've known will always have a final session in which they read the book out loud to see how does it flow. Does it sound like poetry? In other words, does every word count? So the only time I had controlled vocabulary was my first book, which was an easy to read. And that was Miss Piggy's Night Out that I mentioned. And that was fun because my daughter was a first grader. So it was perfect because she got to inform me, which she loved. And she bossed me around and she'd read it out loud. And when she got to a stammering point, she'd say, exit out, Mom. So that's the only time where I've done an actual structured, easy to read. These are the word choices you make when you're writing poetry, and I don't dumb it down for the kids. I simplify, and simplifying and purifying and distilling. It's distillation.
Purifying is a great word for that process.
And so you're absolutely right. It's not easier. In fact, it's sometimes harder to write for kids. And people always ask, what ages are the books for? And even though I have to break down and say 6 to 10 is the sweet spot, I then beg them to have it as a coffee table book, because all of the research is in here. It's just distilled.
And every child under the age of 6 is still going to be attracted first to the illustrations and then to what's in it, and they'll listen to it even if they can't even read, and they'll make their own sense out of it and may point out a word or something that they don't know. What's that? You know, that famous question that kids ask, what's that? And then you have an opportunity for another little teachable moment, and then the older child who picks it up either for a younger sibling or even for them, for themselves, the 10, 11, maybe even 12-year-old who happens to see it and opens it because of the nature of the subject, then the language has to sort of speak to them too, And I think that's where the poetry comes from. That who can turn it down? Who can turn down poetry?
I feel that way.
So, I do too. They'll keep reading because it's short.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't require a lot of time, and it doesn't require a lot of effort, but it's still a rich experience.
Right.
Is what I think in the best kids books.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really well put.
Well, I think that you know, I think that that's right. That's that writing children's fiction is not as easy as it sounds. You can't just, I'm going to tell a story.
Right.
It's the same elements of telling any other story.
Right.
Character development, setting, you know, that kind of thing, plot.
Right.
You know, and language.
And the arc has a short time to develop of beginning, middle, and end. And if you're trying to do justice to the people who I come to know and love, whether there's someone who delivered to lighthouse families or they're World War II veterans. I mean, I was checking my drafts back with the Navajo code talkers, sending them back and forth to get it right.
Yeah.
Or, you know, whether it's the autism community, you just want to get it right.
Right.
And I speak to a lot of audiences of different ages, whether it's Rotary or an elementary school or a mixed bookstore audience in the case of Every Turtle Counts, which I'm, you know, going around with now. And, you know, they're really interesting topics for all ages. So you want to make it count. So.
Well, right, and you also want these children to become today's children to become so enamored of the story and their experience of the story that when they get older, they pass it on. I mean, so many of the books that came through our house, our kids are almost 23 and already almost 19.
Yeah.
But when they were little, the books that came through, we were just as enamored with these books as they were, and we've kept them over the years, and they want them. And so there's going to be this passing on of our favorite stories, you know, hopefully down the line.
Well,
but that's what you want your best books to do, you know.
And we're kindred spirits on that, because those are the books that I save. And I mean, I'm a major, you know, reader, but I've always loved picture books and children's books. That's why it's hard for me when people ask, what age are they for? Because I still love, you know, I've got my Make Way for Ducklings and Time of Wonder front and center, and my E.B. White books, I think, are my favorites, you know, Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, and and then for picture books, you know, all of the Robert McCloskey books. And you've been great with Cape Cod Book Scene about promoting all the new children's authors on the Cape who are doing a great job.
I think that's huge. I really do. I think that if we, obviously we have a vested interest in reading at the basic level, and if we don't start with the kids and really invest in the kids so that they love it, you know, not just tolerate it, but love it. We have to show love for it. I think that all of us will be better off, and those who come after us will be, you know, better off too for having that skill and that love.
Well, we're always grateful that you've, you know, really put your time where your love is, and developing this show, and your writing of the Cape Cod Book Scene for the paper has been inspired so many people, and I really mean it. Just thinking of the writers who feel supported, and then the people on the Cape are remarkable because they're here because they love it. We know we live in a special place. They're looking for people who are celebrating that, and you know, there are some wonderful books coming from Cape Cod writers, as there always have been.
There are incredible books coming from Cape Cod writers, and it's funny you should mention that, because I've got about 30 on my desk right now, all local, and about 125 over the course of a given year. And so the output is remarkable.
And why do you think? Because I'm interested. You're always asking this question, but why do you think the Cape is such a literary landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple things. People come here and they have time to write. I think also they come here and it's a rich environment already to come into, and I think that they've held on to stories their whole lives wherever they were, and they get here and it's okay to put those stories down.
It's so great.
I really do. I'm out of time.
Oh,
unfortunately, I hate to
darn.
say that. Thank you so much for being here this morning. They're lovely books. The Lighthouse Santa, The Unbreakable Code, and Every Turtle Counts. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. And I'll see you again, too, on the next Cape Cod Book Scene.